Ciao, ciao, buongiorno. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Thank you so much for coming to this panel. I know it's a Saturday. A lot of people are probably hangover from yesterday, so it's good to have you here and have this half-packed room. So today we're going to be talking about the fundraising limbo. Why are there no grants in Southern Europe? I wanted to have like a show of hands who is living in or working in Southern Europe. Here from the... Okay, this is a good crowd. Basically, I mean, if you're from Southern Europe, you probably already noticed that there's not a lot of grants in here. For the past few years, a lot of these projects have been our newsrooms, but also other newsrooms in the countries that we're coming from, have been battling to get grants, core grants, structural grants, in order to do our work. But we've been finding ourselves in this limbo where we're not rich enough to have national foundations who can give us money to national newsrooms, but also we don't have an authoritarian enough regime for other international foundations to put us on the list, on the map. And so, both Fumasa and Solomon and Irpi have been basically trying to find ways to still work despite all of this context. So we're going to hear from different experiences on how we go about sustainability of our newsrooms, but also really to try to think how we can go beyond this funding discussion. I think it's also important to recognize that these three newsrooms are quite privileged when compared to maybe other newsrooms that are even in a more precarious condition in their countries. But really this panel is not really about us trying to convince you to give us money, but rather for us to have a frank and honest discussion about how we can shift this perspective in our places, being for us to get more grants or other newsrooms to get more grants. We are aiming at speaking, the three of us, for like half an hour and then having 20 minutes for questions, comments. I mean, I think it would be nice, since we have a good crowd from Southern Europe, to also kind of hear from your experiences. And I'm sure there's also other people from other contexts that are that feel familiar to this issue, even if they're not from Southern Europe. I'm sure some of you are thinking like, you privileged, we are actually in worse condition than you. Anyway, I hope we can have a nice conversation. I will let my colleagues in the panel to introduce themselves. My name is Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro. I'm a journalist and I'm part of, I work as a journalist and I'm part of Fumasa. It's an investigative journalism podcast based in Portugal, focused on scrutinizing systems of oppression and also talking about the people who resist them. We publish in podcast, usually one investigation a year, sometimes one every 2 years, something like that. And maybe I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but maybe start already with a question so you can introduce yourself and then move forward. So this goes faster. I wanted to start by a topic that probably most of you had heard very extensively about this year in Perugia, about the USAID freeze that has obviously dire consequences in sustainability to a lot of the newsrooms that are coming here to Perugia this year, and actually, to be honest, coming here to Perugia with a runway of a few months, money like not reaching for. I was coming here a little bit like, we are not in a good position, and I heard from a lot of my colleagues that, I don't know, their budgets were slashed like half or 80% or whatever, and then I felt like, okay, we're actually a bit better than them. But I wanted to ask you, for example, Chechi, what do you think was the consequence for you, for EDP, on this USAID freeze, for example? And please introduce yourself.
So we're left with no money and no voice.
No. This panel is sponsored by some pills that you've been taking for the...
Yeah. No, jokes apart, sorry for my voice, but we'll try to make this work. As some of you might have heard, we hosted a party last night, and the air conditioning was really strong. But yeah, jokes apart, I'm the director of IRPI, that is Investigative Reporting Project Italy, the only center for investigative reporting in Italy, and we also publish IRPI Media. When we discussed about this panel among us, we were looking at ourselves and we were sort of, smiling in a way at the fact that although we look at this really big tragedy of US aid freeze and all the consequences, not only on journalism, but really on all civil society activities in the world, and literally we've been overwhelmed by requests of help by friends and colleagues in Latin America and other places. We in Southern Europe, we were untouched. And although this looks like a really good news, really is the symptom, like the air conditioning, of the fact that we were so much in the dark corner of all this funding all these years, that really is just a symptom of how bad the whole situation has been all these years for Southern Europe. That really is a whole geographical area. And when we say Southern Europe, we include, of course, Italy, but also Portugal, Greece, small country but very relevant one, Malta, and you got Cyprus, but also some of the Balkan countries, which are, for example, Slovenia, that are out of the scope of a lot of the funding that has helped Eastern Europe. So again, it was, in a way, I would say interesting to see how we were untouched by this situation and condition that touched all the rest of the newsrooms that we usually collaborate with, and how we suddenly found each other in the position of being like the stable organizations, but really that isn't the situation. So I think this is bringing up some challenging times for all of us, but really also an opportunity to bring up a more equitable distribution of the funding, a more fair, but also that we in Southern Europe have learned a way of survival which can be useful for others in the space. So how we can, bring that back, and we're gonna have that discussion at the end of the panel. But yeah, how we could survive all these years and think creatively out of the box and also out of our geography to be able to get to the funding.
Yeah, Eli, can you introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about, did this US aid freeze have any impact directly or indirectly in Solomon?
Thank you, Ricardo. Can you hear me well? I think you do, yeah. So, hi, I'm Iliana Papangeli. I'm the managing director of Solomon since 2022. For those of you who don't know us, I don't take it for granted that you know Solomon. Solomon is a small independent non-profit newsroom based in Greece. We are committed to a public interest journalism, digging into the stories that matter, and challenging dominant narratives and holding power to account. Over the past few years, I would say we are among a very few independent outlets in Greece that we've been working hard to rebuild trust in journalism, especially in a space and country that where trust has been badly shaken. We also team up regularly with outlets and teams from across Europe and beyond, sometimes to produce investigations that expose abuses of power and push for accountability, whether it's at the national or EU level. USAID cut the elephant in the room. We have existed, like Cecilia just described, without ever receiving, for many years, without receiving any kind of support from the USAID or any other kind of state funds, and also with very little available funding from donors and foundations, just because we happen to be in this dark corner and this like geographical place that is not usually a priority geographical place for these big foundations. So yeah, I guess there are things that we had to think out of the box and try to do things differently. And I guess we have succeeded that into some extent since we're still here. Solomon started in 2017, and despite all the difficulties and the financial constraints, we've made it that far. So far, so good. So yeah, I mean, we're not directly affected by the USAID, but I mean, still, it is really, really sad, really depressing to see right now, like the journalism community worldwide in a crisis, and I do believe that eventually it will affect us all. But yeah, we can discuss more about that in yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about how you go about sustainability at Solomon? How have you managed, despite all of this, to still be here?
Solomon since the beginning, when it started, like I said, in 2017, has a business model that it's based on funds from donors and foundations. So the vast majority of the money come from there. I would say that we were somewhat lucky back in 2017 when the organization started, because Solomon used to cover exclusively migration and refugee stories. And back then, during the years of the refugee crisis in Greece and in Europe, it was easier to attract grants both from like media programs, but also like human rights and migration programs from big foundations. Open Society Foundation was the big donor of the organization for many years. We are actually probably one of the last few in the region that we still have a grant running, but it's gonna end soon, like this September 2025. It was. I would say that it was a good thing in a way. This check-in with the reality that you cannot be relied only on one big donor. So since 2022, when also like the management team changed in the organization, we decided to work like very actively towards diversifying our revenue sources. So yeah, and we have succeeded that to some like good extent, and yeah. So we're still, long story short, we're still like the majority of the funds still come from journalistic grants or big foundations. But also we invest a lot into developing a subscription model where we receive donations from our readers. This income at this point is only 10% of our annual budget, but it used to be less last year and the year before, so we see some good developments towards that.
Yeah. At FUMASA, we actually have a similar story to the extent of OSF being a donor. OSF was actually the first donor of FUMASA, and the reason why we managed to go from a volunteering project into a professional newsroom in 2018. We got, I think, 3 grants in total from the Open Society Foundations. We were the first and only ever journalism project in Portugal to get a grant from the OSF. So again, there's quite a lot of privilege here, like talking about there's no grants in Portugal, but we do actually get grants, but we're probably the only newsroom who does get the grants in Portugal. Nobody else does. So we did get OSF for 3 years, then you all know what happened, and we stopped. And for yeah, we had also this check-in with reality that we didn't really know how to do fundraising. Like we just basically expected that this money would come forever, and it didn't. And so we started actively trying to learn how to do fundraising, which is something that we're still trying. But we managed to secure two grants now that are basically what covers half of the budget of Fumasa. We are a team of 11 people. We spend 25K per month. Half of that, or 56% of that, comes from grants from Limelight Foundation. It's a core structural grant, and also that's one more or less 100,000 per year for 3 years. And then also Fred Foundation, a new foundation that maybe you heard about, also got us a grant of 30K last year. Let's see what happens this year. But this basically composes 56%. And then the rest really came from us realizing that we couldn't really expect funds to come. And so since 2018, we started this membership program with the vision of creating the first professional newsroom in Portugal to be fully backed by the people with monthly or annual recurring donations, while having everything, all our journalism open to everyone with no paywalls, no sponsored content, no businesses, and no revenue, no business model. But unfortunately, we managed to arrive at the point where we have already 11.5 thousand euros per month coming from membership. This means more or less 2,000 people give money recurrently to us as a donation, which is really a relief, you know, like coming to Perugia, especially for fundraising, and knowing that half of the budget is already covered by membership, puts us in a position where we're like, we can breathe a little bit more. And yeah, having this as a really structural, radical core of the project really helped also editorially in other ways. Yeah. And what about IRPI? How does it go about sustainability?
So we all sort of originated from similar situations, and we were some of the privileged ones, like Solomon and Fumasa with the OSF funding. Although I do want to stress a thing, every single time I finally managed to get a foundation to provide us core funding. The very initial chat sentence was, yes, let's sit for a coffee, but we don't fund in Italy. We don't fund in Southern Europe. Like, it's always been like that, and we said, okay, no problem, you know, we just want to, learn from each other, which was also true. But I think I'm talking for everyone here. We had to stretch our imagination and their imagination beyond the geographical scope. So we exist because we did that, because actually those funding that we got, the core funding that got us where we are today, were not taught for Southern Europe. And that's important to stress, not because we were good, but it's just to say that even now that everything looks so depressing, I wouldn't give up. That said, we were also among the last fortunate ones of the US funding. We obviously, as it was an exit grant, knew that, we had to somehow counter the situation. We had been supported also by another European foundation for some years, the Dacian Foundation, and it was a shift of strategy, supporting networks instead of national entities. So really, we haven't been able to building so far a model in which we have support from our public to the point of Solomon and Fumasa. We have launched a membership campaign last year. So far, also maybe given the situation in which Italy is in which frankly, people would think twice before donating 50 euros. It's growing, but very slowly. I think it accounts for like 1% of our budget. But it's still very important, not just for the economics, but really for our relation with your audience, with the community, and so we want to keep going. But it's definitely at the moment an anti-economic operation, costing about 50,000, getting in about 6,000, so you don't do it for the money. And the rest, so I would say 0.5% of our budget comes from project grants. Big thanks to Journalism Fund, which is one of the ones that we hit more often than many others. Also, a few ones in Italy. We managed to get some foundations in Italy to support some projects. But again, very little and only project grants. Now, I heard in some of the fundraising panels in this festival, especially some of the US donors yesterday saying, but independent journalists should not go for project grants because it shifts their core activity and whatever. Do we have an option? We don't. What we've done is you learn how to survive through that in an intelligent way, meaning you can still support a lot of the reporting through that, not only of your own organization, but of freelancers. There is more than 40 freelancers that work or publish with EDP Media, and a lot of those pass through Journalism Fund independently, and then they find us as a publishing platform. Or some of those grants we also apply as an entity, and at the end they can also cover some of your operational costs, or at least some of the costs to, for example, reach your audience. Ideal, I don't know, definitely a way to go, and I think, again, given that we all had to operate in a fundraising limbo, a so-called mixed revenue model, it's really what we have to do. We have been trying to also develop some products, which can be paid for products. Again, so far, a very anti-economical operation. We printed our first book, t-shirts, we were selling them last night at the party. But for example, if you go for, I'm just saying something silly, but organic cotton, and then you print with a small typography because you don't want to go to the big corporations and all of that, and you try to be sustainable all through the way, the costs of all of these are so high that really before we can actually talk about revenues, it's a joke. So you really still need either philanthropy or big investors for you to be in the position of having enough capital to then develop all of this. I also want to reply to what Ileana said about the US funding freeze, because when I said we weren't touched, it was to give to the room really the mood of how left out of the whole international discourse we've been all these years in Southern Europe. But of course it is gonna hit. It is already hitting. Currently hitting because a lot of great colleagues that we work with in the rest of the world are asking for help, and we don't have the money to help them. But also because there is so far not really an answer by the European philanthropic environment or what have you and maybe there will never be to actually manage to cover that hole. And there is going to be so much competition on the same funders, on the EU grants from the European Union. So again, for example, we have built our membership based on inspiration mainly from MASA. So of course there is some competition, but the only way through here really looks like a collaboration. And in our small, I don't know if I'm anticipating something here, but in our small world, what we try to do is some of these grants, the project grants that we want, to do some re-granting, so basically inviting in some smaller partners, because they're amazing collectives. We are a publisher, like a media also, but there are some collectives or some organizations or even some local independent media like Indip in Sardinia that cannot go for certain type of funding. So for example, we cannot go to certain donors like OCCRP can, like Oak Foundation will never talk to us, we're too small. And likewise, we can go to certain mid-funding that a smaller organization cannot go. So the idea was to play the buffer, and we haven't seen happening a lot of that when we talk about bigger money. But we wanted to bring some best practice. So just to give you an example, with a 50K grant, you can still allocate about 10 or 20 of that to smaller organizations, split it into smaller parts. And although it looks really little money, 4,000 each, isn't that also what Journalism Fund does? And it does have an impact. Because if you're bringing 5,000 euros to a Sardinian, the island, independent media that is based on subscription for their readers, that money helps at the end of the day. Maybe they can have more creative thinking they can pay for a photographer, a graphic designer, a comic novelist, or whatever.
Yeah, I think maybe it's important to actually name some names of like foundations who actually don't give money to these countries. Like Adesium doesn't give money to Portugal, Greece, or Spain, or I think at the moment actually no national projects. OSF obviously is leaving. Luminate doesn't have us on the map. Most of the foundations that are present and speaking in Perugia in most of the panels don't have these three countries on the list of on the list of countries from which newsrooms can apply to their funds even. So I really, really relate to this conversation of like sitting with a funder for breakfast, exciting them about Fumaça, they're really excited, and then I'm like, okay, so how do I convince you to give me a grant? And they're like, no, Portugal is not on the list. And this conversation has been going and going and going. And I wanted to ask, like, if it's so difficult, because then you also get to a point where, for example, Limelight does give money to these countries, but if it gives money to one Portuguese newsroom, nobody else will have it. The same thing with Civitatis. If there's one Portuguese newsroom that has money, nobody else can have it, which also creates some toxic competition between these newsrooms, which maybe can be something that in another panel we can discuss. But I wanted to ask, like, what is, for example, Solomon's relationship with national grants, with national foundations? Do you get money from any?
Zero, I guess. Yeah, no, we don't get any national grants because there are not really any available. We got a grant from Civitatis, so we are the Greek media that gets the money from Civitatis. Civitatis is the only one, which is actually like a pooled funding. And there is one foundation that gives money to, which is Bodosaki Foundation, and that's it, I think. Then
gives money to Civitatis, not to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not to us directly, but it's one of the foundations in the collective of Civitatis. And then there is Stavros Niarchos Foundation, which I guess many of you already know. They are the exclusive funders of IMED, which is independent organization that also organizes this big journalism festival in Greece every year. But again, like, we never get money from Stavros Niarchos or either through IMED. They don't do re-grants, which is, I mean, it would be nice to have that as an option, and it's something, I mean, we are a very small, tiny organization, and in the past, it was something we did with one of the grants we took from OSF, and we were not even obliged to do that. We were like, you know, we are only a bunch of independent investigative outlets in Greece. We happen to be in this privileged position and to be able also, I guess, because of the cross-border aspect we have in our journalism, it's easier for us to attract this kind of grants. And we included another small, even smaller than us, outlet in that budget. Yeah, and then there's, of course, the discussion among colleagues in Greece and outlets like Solomon. So even if these foundations would be willing to give money and support journalism, we'll be willing to take this money, but this is, yeah, maybe another conversation for another panel.
Ceci, do you have grants from Italian foundations?
No, we have one project grant. This year is the first time we've been supported by Fondazione Charlemagne for a project on, but it's a specific, very strict geographical scope, because they have a project on the periphery of Rome, so we could fit into that with a specific investigation that we're doing. And in the past, we had a similar thing with two foundations supporting us in the making of one documentary, but that was it. We couldn't even continue the conversation with them beyond the grant, because you actually apply to the project that if you're approved, it's any other project grant, like you send a pitch, if it's approved, that's it, but there is really a lack of mindset, and there is this fear that somehow journalism, especially investigative journalism, is somehow political, somehow bringing you a lot of trouble. So even just sitting down for a coffee, in fact, it would be too much. So this is a work that we're trying to contribute to with, there is an amazing leaders of the Association of Philanthropists in Italy, they're called Ferro, and they're doing really this bridging work in which we're trying to show that in Europe, for example, there are donors that try to have that relation with possible grantees or with the media, to really just also understand whether they're important for democracy or not, if there are pillars that you should contribute to, because then there is a contribution back to democracy, transparency, and what have you. But this work so far hasn't produced any concrete fruits. But we know, and I know see Samir in the room, that there are some people working hard in that regard, so we hope that we can get some changes in the mindset, but definitely nothing that is going to fund IRPI or any other newsroom tomorrow. So yeah, and this is just about project funding, core funding. I think it's like science fiction. So, but I do think, and Iliana mentioned Civitatis, what we could be doing and contributing to is trying to convince more Italian foundations to, for example, enter a pool fund like Civitatis. Because, for example, some of these foundations, they're a foundation from the oil and gas business. We will not get their money even if they would offer maybe. But if they go through Civitatis, obviously they're not funding directly IRPI, and they might be funding some of the other newsrooms in Europe. So basically, the Italians could benefit from the Greek, and so on and so forth. There was one Italian foundation in Civitatis, and they pulled out of the pool fund, which sounds like a joke of words, but is not.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing in Portugal. We have no grants from Portuguese foundations. We did have, in the whole 10 years history of Fumaça, we got one grant from a Portuguese foundation called Gulbenkian, maybe you know, one of the richest foundations in the country, in the world. So, I mean, there is money. Money, there, like, it exists. It's just not being funneled to Portugal. Gulbenkian had a investigative journalism grant for a specific investigation, I think for 2 editions, 2 years, and then they stopped. Officially, I don't know what is the reason, but the backdoor conversation is that there's 1 or 2 investigations that hit the wrong spot, and so they didn't keep on doing it. And so at the moment, there's actually, I think, 2 grants in Portugal. I wouldn't say 0, but there's like 2 grants. One is run by Gerador, another independent newsroom magazine that actually re-grants some money to freelance, to small, like young freelance journalists. So they are doing something like 5K grant for a freelancer to do their job. I mean, at least doing more than most of the foundations. And then there was also a very recent grant organized by the City Hall of Lisbon, also to cover, not structural grant, but to cover specific stories. Usually, I mean, they were looking for feel-good stories about diversity in Lisbon, etc. But still, like, it's nice to just see something popping. But yeah, but other than that, there's not really anything that we can apply to in Portugal. And so we've been also inspired by the work that IRPI and some of the comrades in Italy have been doing, trying to convince some foundations to enter in this sector. We've been also trying to do the same in Portugal. So let's see. I think I totally agree that this is a work that is kind of for the next decade, not really maybe even for our projects, but for the projects to come in the future. So I said in the beginning that we were aiming to speak for 30 minutes and then give space for you, and we spoke for 32 minutes. Questions, comments, maybe should we get like 1 or 2, maybe 3, so we can make sure that more people can speak? There's already 3 people with the hand, and more people? that want to speak? Okay, so there's 3 people here. Can you maybe pass the microphone?
Ciao, hi, I'm Belle de Jong. My main source of income is currently the European correspondent, which covers Europe but is not in Southern Europe. I live in Malta, where there's very, very little money for journalism. There is no government money, and even if there is, it's not really a source you want to get your money from in Malta. And I'm mainly freelancing, which doesn't get paid. Like, you can get published for free, and that means you fully rely on cross-border grants, which is great because you do cool cross-border stories, but it doesn't cover national issues. And I actually really just wanted to say that I'm really glad, first of all, that there are newsrooms managing in Southern Europe somehow, especially as was said in the beginning, that we didn't really notice like the US aid stop because we didn't even get funding from them in the first place. That's pretty messed up. Yeah. I had some other stuff I wanted to mention.
Can I ask you to be just a bit...
Sorry, yes,
so
sorry.
that more people can speak, so we can have maybe 2 rounds of questions.
Yeah, I think my main question, or like my main point is that it's a bit frustrating that we kind of have to wait to get to maybe a more authoritarian state before we can actually get foreign funding when it's already a bit too late. So I'm really glad you're doing this. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next one. There's a person here and then another one there.
I saw Samir smiling, so I don't know if he's got a comment.
May I? Hi, I'm Roberta Carlini. I work at the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom in Florence. And thank you for your insights that were very interesting. I'm still wondering why Southern Europe is in this blind spot, and what comes in my mind is an historical foundational classification of the media systems in which the Mediterranean model is characterized as a model with a high collateralism with political system and also low professionalism, which of course is not your case, but maybe it can be the justification, let's say, why there is not a strong willingness there is not this idea that financing journalism is good. This is just my consideration, but I have a question. I'm also impressed by the fact that you never mentioned, you mentioned the national funding, the government funding that are very low. I know the Italian situation, but I guess that it is more or less the same. You never mentioned, none of you mentioned the European fundings, and my question if this is why they are few or not accessible, too difficult to access. And then I have another question that is, would you benefit from another kind of support that is like an infrastructure, like an European infrastructure to disseminate your content accessible for free from your organization?
Thank you. Maybe one more, and you called out Samir. If you want to talk, also go for it. Yeah, and then maybe we answer to all of them at the same time, so we lose less time.
Yeah, my question goes in the same direction. My name is Cristina Costa. I've been working as a journalist in Portugal, so I know your situation well, and in Germany, which is then the opposite. My question goes in the same direction. You didn't mention the European funds. Would you wish maybe for a different system? We had it in film for a while. The media funds were, for example, if you invest as an investor in a fund, now we're talking about money, you get a better discount in taxes if you invest in a small outlet in Greece or in Portugal or in Italy. And the other question goes also in the same direction.
Sorry, if you want us to reply, we need to keep it.
Yeah, okay,
like
then that's it.
At 50, we need to leave the room. So. Niels.
Since I don't have a lot of time, one thing, we have 1.4 million to distribute. The next deadline is 12th of June. It's core funding. We have 40,000 average amount for each of you. So of course it's a competition, but still we are also focusing very much on the south of Europe. A lot of Italians are receiving money, and more than ever. We're supporting also a lot of Portuguese media outlets in Lisbon, for instance. Also, we receive money from Greece, from a Greece foundation, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. The problem is now they put the money in hospitals. We need your support to convince them. The same with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation and São Paulo. You know, we need some support from media and journalists. I went to Greece and asked to journalists, would you take money from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation or the other one, the other family of the oil company? And they said no, but if you take it, it's nice because you can distribute it all over Europe. So help us to convince them.
Thank you. Should we answer? Who wants to? Yeah, you want to.
I had actually mentioned the EU funds when we said that there's going to be more and more competition now that the USAID has had a freeze. IRPI, in a consortium of other media, has applied 2 times to Crea Media without getting it. We reapplied this year. We'll see how that goes. It's not easy. And one part of us hope we win it because we will solve a lot of our problems and half of the ecosystem. One part of us hope not to get it because it's going to be a lot of admin work, a lot of bureaucracy. The applications are hell, you know that. But also we're all left with no other options than also trying to go with EU funds. So what else? I mean, yes, the problem is not only learning how to do that and then applying as much as possible. We're also in reference network. We know a lot of our colleagues also have been trying to apply and will apply, and we're all doing that effort. But the big question is the EU planning to guarantee the same amount of money or adding more in the next months or years? Because voice in the corridor isn't exactly in that direction. And now also all of those who don't have USAID money anymore will go for those money. So I think nationally none of us apply for government funding, but we do apply or try to apply to the EU ones.
Yeah, just 2 very short comments. The first one for the EU funds, the way we at Solomon, we never try to go after an EU program is because we don't have the capacity. I mean, we are a team, as I told you, of 7 people. Very recently we became 7, and we are really lucky to have for the first time a fundraiser in the team, like a person dedicated to contribute to our fundraising efforts. And yeah, a second comment, yes, we need to work together. I agree. Journalism fund, outlets like us, we need to work together to convince these big foundations to distribute money to journalism. At the same time, I mean, I'm not being naive or I don't want to sound romantic or anything, but I think they know what we need. I don't know if they want to pretend that they don't know or if they want us to chase them, but I mean, Stavros Niarchos, they give money to journalism, but they choose to do it in a very, in a certain way. Because everyone has their own agenda, I guess. Yeah.
Let me just add something, then I'll let you. Touching on the European projects, actually Fumasa got a grant for a European project 2 years ago. It's a project called Journalism Value Project. Maybe you heard about that, in partnership with Investigate Europe, Atlas Werderly, Network Research, and Arena for Journalism. We did apply and we won, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it again, but it was just so much work in terms of admin. Like, we almost have to hire someone in order to make sure that we can fulfill the project. And to be honest, I think it is true that in general, maybe if we oversimplify it, we could say that the European Union is putting a lot of millions in journalism, but I really, really doubt that we can actually call that putting money in journalism. It is putting money in media, but I mean, as I said that today in the Journalism Fund breakfast, I really feel like, just like Perugia, it's a journalism festival, but really about money and funds and media. I think the same thing about the projects of the European Union. And I really, really don't expect any political representative to solve our sustainability problem. I don't expect it, and I really don't want to chase them. I think we should find other ways to mutually aid ourselves, maybe convincing foundations to give money to pool fundings and other fundings, other ideas that are on the table. I don't expect the European Union to solve this problem, or any other government. And I really, really relate to this question or this comment about foundations hoping, expecting, waiting for us to be a bit more authoritarian until they actually give us money. I actually once had a meeting with a funder who decided not to put Portugal on the list, and ended up with them saying something like, yeah, but I heard that you had elections now recently and the far right really, really won some seats. Maybe next time we can put you on the list, which is utterly disrespectful, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe we just wanted to ask the room, because thank you for the contribution on about why Southern Europe is in a fundraising limbo. Why there are no funds? So is it because the way media was tied to politics in the past, or like, is there any idea, or why are we in the dark corner?
Maybe I can offer a perspective. I think I'm Samir Padani. I'm a consultant working on how does journalism get funded. Don't mob me. I think that there are many, rather than diagnosing, I think where I see opportunities and where I see new vistas opening up, you've mentioned, I'm sorry I was late to the panel, but in the bit that I've heard, you've mentioned things that I think where there are significant possibilities and arguments to be made. Ricardo, you mentioned Lisbon, City of Lisbon. Yes, it's starting with sort of, what you describe as feel-good stories, but actually they're about local culture, patrimony. These are things that matter to people. They will put money into, and it's a foothold. You start there, you maybe build from there. So I think there are things around arts and culture. There are things around, I think one of the things that is really not understood and that actually speaks to a lot of people at the moment is that there is, if you look from the perspective of, media as a sector that has, that deals with skills and employment, you want people to have jobs in it. You want people to have security of jobs. In Portugal, 800 euros a month, I think, is the minimum wage for a journalist, right?
Yeah, 900, quite something.
Yeah. So, I mean, how on earth can somebody live on that and be a journalist and suffer the risk without, with no safety net? So is it any wonder? So I think there are these sorts of issues that I think give you different angles into talking about it to different kinds of stakeholders. And I think focusing on the foundations at the national level or the international level is a strategic mistake. I think you have foundations also at the local level. I mean, in Italy has got many foundations that work in one of the words I've come to learn over the years is campanilismo. That can be a bad thing and that can be a good thing. I think it's in some ways a good thing. Foundations that are in a place deeply care about it, and they should be caring about the information environment where they are and where they fund. That's an opportunity to talk to them and to show them. And I think this exists in, there's regional level funding in Greece, within different parts of Greece and various things like that. So I think there are these opportunities in areas where there is, and the last thing I'll say is I think also one of the big things that I think is beginning to happen is that banks, local banks, credit unions, cooperative banks are starting to think about these issues because people are going to them and saying, we can't raise funds, we can't, we've got nothing, we've got no assets to leverage. So how do we get a loan? So I think things like that are beginning to happen.
Thank you so much. We reached our time limit. Thank you so much for being here and for engaging. I hope you liked it. We're going to be around if you want to ask questions, give some perspectives. Yeah, and see you there, and Free Palestine.
Thank you.